Hello, this is For the Record, a series of conversations amongst the faculty of the University of the Philippines School of Library and Information Studies. In each episode, we look at issues and experiences with records in our everyday life. I'm Nathan Isip, and with me are fellow faculty members who are also really familiar faces in another one of our video series in our YouTube channel, Faculty Room. We have Professor Waina Therese Santos, one of our information literacy scholars, and we have Professor Paul Jason Perez, one of our ICT faculty and also an expert in freedom of information. So hello, Sir PJ and Ma'am Waina.
Hello.
Hello, Sir Nathan. Thank you for inviting us.
And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Based on my introduction with them, you probably have an idea of what this episode of For the Record is going to be all about. We will be talking about records and democracy. Such a deep topic, and um, it might end up being controversial. Nakapula pa naman tayo today, Sir PJ.
I'm wearing the UP colors.
Yeah. Sayang mong why na you should have worn green. But then, no.
Blue. Blue to.
But yeah, like I said, we'll be talking about records and democracy. The ICA, or the International Council on Archives, has this universal declaration archives, and they talk of the value of archives as authoritative sources of information that underpins accountable and transparent administrative actions. So here we have the concept of archives and records being instruments for transparency, for accountability. And then, of course, with those, there will be deeper implications when it comes to participative democracy, when it comes to protecting citizens' rights, when it comes to promoting responsible citizenship. But before we get into the nitty gritty of those details, let's first talk about records in the context of information literacy. So, records as sources of information. And let's go to Waina. Um, when we're talking of information literacy, what exactly is information literacy, and why is it so important in within a democratic context?
Okay, sige. So before I answer your question, hindi ako nakapag-thank you kanina. Thank you for inviting us here to your show. Yeah, it's nice to be part of For the Record.
Yeah,
For this
thanks for
episode.
joining us. Napapapos nga ako kanina kasi muntik ko na masabing welcome to Faculty.
Sige. Thank you so much, Sir Nathan. And ayun. So, let me first define information literacy. I'm going to use the definition from the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals in this definition because I think that it suits the context of our discussion very well. So, information literacy is defined by CLIP, the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, as the ability to think critically and make balanced judgments about any information that we find and use. So, information literacy empowers us as citizens to develop informed views and to engage fully with society. So, an information literate individual knows where to find information, locate information, evaluate information sources, and use information ethically. Okay, so many different uses of information can be used for decision making. Yeah, not just for academic purposes. No, so there are many uses for the information that we find. So to answer your question, people should care about information literacy because one, so according nga to the definition of CLIP, information literacy enables people to engage fully in society. It helps them understand, make sense of what is happening around them. Okay, so being information literate helps in recognizing the message, what is the underlying message in the things that one reads, hears, or sees. Yan. Related to this, being information literate, one is able to judge the authority of sources, ayan, whether a source should be deemed reliable or useful, again, in different contexts. Yan. So for the purposes pa rin of making informed decisions. And point number two, even outside the aspect of citizenship, people should care about information literacy because it influences other aspects of our life, yung ating everyday life, even yung ating yung simple decisions about what to do, ganyan, what to buy, yan. Our decision making process is affected by the information that we get. And education is also affected by our being information literate. The workplace, our performance in the workplace is affected by information literacy. And of course, something that is very crucial now, another reason for us to be concerned with what IL is and how it benefits us is because we are living amidst a pandemic. Information literacy also benefits our health, our well-being. Yeah. So that's why people should care about IL and we should strive to be more, information literate.
Ayun. So, thank you. Ang ganda ng sagot, especially when talking about engaging in society. And based on that response, we can see how that social engagement is really interconnected with every single aspect of our lives, whether it's our work, our home, our health, our mental being. So it's not just about political engagement. It's not just about the concept of democracy as a political instrument, but rather it's really embedded into our being as humans and as members of society. And that makes us wonder, what specific, can you give us some specific types of information or some specific types of records even that citizens or people can use to engage and participate in society?
Okay. Um, Sige, there are a lot of questions, a lot of questions that people can ask. No, it's really hard to identify um, just one. So kung ibabalik natin to do sa context to sinabi ko kanina, because there are many different uses for information literacy skills. There are many different applications for it sa ating mga buhay. Nabanggit natin yung mga context kanina. So, yun. So, as I've said, it's hard to identify just one question or one or question that people should ask about information sources or what question they should ask. Instead, I think instead of asking or identifying that particular question or one particular question, I think what's important is for people to recognize that it is more important for them to form the habit of asking questions rather than identifying just what are the questions that we should ask, but una muna the recognition that it's okay to ask questions. So the act of asking questions, that's very important kasi kasama nito yung uh, examining everything. So sabi natin kanina, 'di ba, uh, um, marami tayong mga ibang applications ng information literacy skills natin. So, when we say application of our information literacy skill, kasama talaga niyan, yung core niyan kasi, yung examining everything beyond what is being said to us, what is it that we are reading. Ayan. So, examining everything, the core of being information literate is being evaluative, being critical thinkers. So, I think instead of identifying, oh, this is the question that you should ask, ang parang dapat sabihin natin is we should practice instead yung mismong asking questions and being evaluative. Yon. Yon. Kasi ang dami natin pwedeng, again, different context, different questions. So, yon.
So that's really good, especially highlighting the importance of critical thinking and asking questions. So critical thinking and asking questions is not really so much about being critical in the sense that you're criticizing something, but it's asking about, it's holding people accountable. It's being transparent about things. It's questioning why you are engaging in certain practices. So if for our regular viewers, if you remember our very first episode where we talked about the records being produced during ECQ, oh my, that has been a long time ago. That's been months. But yeah, we were asking about, all right, why is this record being created in a particular way? Why is a quarantine pass being issued in this particular format? Why is this record being used in such a manner? So it's not that we are criticizing the way the system is being implemented, but rather we are asking these questions. And it's when we start to ask questions that it's when we start to ask questions that we are truly participating in our social institutions and thus in our democratic processes. And talking about holding people accountable, and more specifically, when talking about democracy, it's all about holding your government accountable. So, Sir PJ, you're our expert on freedom of information. But before we get to freedom of information, let's discuss the general construct of open government and accountability in government. Can you tell us a bit about open government and what it's all about?
Sure. Thank you again, Sir Jonathan, for inviting us. So, I would say that I am studying and researching about FOI. I'm not sure if I'm an expert yet, but definitely not. But FOI is one of my advocacies and one of my interests. And open government, there's a lot of definitions out there, and right now it is really an umbrella term. But the one that I really like is, and the one that is widely accepted, is the one from the OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So I have my notes here. Let me just read it. Uh, Open government is a culture of governance that is based on innovative and sustainable public policies and practices inspired by the principles of transparency, accountability, and participation that fosters democracy and inclusive growth. So the keywords here are the three principles of transparency, accountability, and participation. So that is open government. So how do we implement open government? How do we put it in practice? Perhaps the most concrete example would be the open government partnerships, so or OGP. It is a multi-sectoral organization composed of national and local government units, civil society organizations, businesses, and the academe. And if you're going to read about it, the Philippine government is very proud of being the founding member of OGP way back in 2011, along with with seven other countries. So Philippines is one of the founding countries when it comes to OGP. So what is OGP? They are the ones encouraging these partners to have initiatives that are aligned with open government with the open government principle. And right now, there are 11 policy areas under the OGP. And I'm just going to share some stats about the Philippines. So there are some dimensions or policy areas in OGP, such as anti-corruption, civic space, gender justice, digital governance, open parliaments, right to information. So all of those are the different dimensions of open government. And currently, the Philippines scores highly when it comes to fiscal openness. So not surprisingly, because the leading agency when it comes to OGP is the Department of Budget Management. So they are the lead agency when it comes to open government, and they have done a lot of initiatives to create participatory policies when it comes to budgeting. However, we scored very poorly when it comes to civic engagement and civic space. This involves the right to assembly, right to association, and defending our journalists. So it's not really a safe space for the Philippines right now when it comes to that area. Um, Another policy that is very close or very related to our field is the right to information. And according to ALA and IFLA, our field, the LIS, the Archives and Records Management, we have some sort of a natural affinity to our right to information. And currently, under right to information, we have the freedom of information, the open data. We also scored highly when it comes to freedom of information. This is because we have a lot of initiatives led by the PCOO, or the Presidential Communications and Operations Office. So they've done some campus caravans. They done some freedom of information literacy among students. They also trained our public librarians how to facilitate FOI. Although we scored very poorly when it comes to open data, so that is something that we must also work on. So I guess what I want to bring to the table is how records management plays with all this open government. So FOI is a policy area where records management is really obviously evident. There's a very good paper that I want to share. This is a paper from Alex Luscombe and Kevin Walby in 2017. The title is Theorizing Freedom of Information. And in that paper, they presented three lenses on how to explain and understand FOI. So the first theory is about, they call it the live archive, but it's really on the practices of records management. So the unit of analysis are the uh, record production, the record management, and if you understand how a certain government unit is doing the records management, if they're doing it well, then you can say that they're doing FOI really well. No, so but I would like to also share another theory that they have about FOI. It is about obfuscation or confusing confusing the citizen. They are saying that the FOI is like a facade that is presented to to the citizen for formality, but behind that facade, there's a lot of socio-political mechanisms to confuse the citizens. And I would like to give examples of the live archive and the obfuscation. So for the first one, when it comes to live archive, a very good example would be unfortunately, not here in the Philippines. So, the one that I've seen is the open parliaments from the New South Wales state government in Australia. So, because they manage their records, all of the records created, even the speeches of the elected officials, once they are created, they're being sentenced and they are being made publicly available. They now have a dashboard of the performance and analytics of their elected officials. Like for example, you can look at the attendance of their elected officials, how they voted on a certain policy, who said no, who voted against their party, who which elected officials are bonding with each other in terms of voting. So they have all these analytics that were made possible because of the records that are being made available to the public. So I'm hoping someday we can have something similar to that one. In terms of obfuscation, so even though let's say we do have a very good records management strategy, it will still it somehow is not enough to explain the FOI performance of a certain country. And this is where I'll bring an example here in the Philippines. So, for example, uh, something that is very controversial right now, which is the SAL-N, or the Statement of Assets, Liabilities, and Net Worth. So, it is a document that is produced by government employees to so that for more transparency and accountability. So, currently here in the Philippines, we have a very confusing system if you want to request for SALN. The Constitution, the FOI order, the EO 2 series of 2016, which is the FOI bill, it states that the SALN should be filed and made available provided that it follows the restrictions stated by other laws. And then if you look at it, there's a very good article by the PCIA, by the Philippine Center of Investigative Journalism, wherein they listed how you're going to request SAL-Ns of different offices. So it's very confusing. So even though, for example, the record, the SAL-N itself, it is a public record, so you file it, and there is an understanding that as a government official, once you file and submitted your SAL-N, uh, there it's supposed to be open to the public. That is at least my view, that it should be open to the public. However, right now, if you're going to request for a SAL and you need to get, for example, if you need to request SAL and from the office of the president or the vice president or the generals in AFP or the governor, vice governor, you need to get their consent. You need to get approval from the person who filed their SALN. And then if you need to get the SALN of elected representatives of the Congress, you need to pay 300 pesos aside from per document, aside from getting the consent of the filer. So uh, it's really confusing for every offices. They have different mechanisms on how to request for the SALN, and there are some instances wherein you really cannot get the SALN. You can only get the summary of the SALN, so you will not see the properties owned by the elected official. And although we have come a long way when it comes to building this infrastructure to make our government accountable. For me, we kind of fell short to the part where it really matters, such as the SALN, because it is a really good document to see if an elected official suddenly get rich, and then so on and so forth. So with that, this is, I guess, this is where the records management, the information literacy, and the open government all comes in together. How citizens can be involved to further help our democracy become healthier, I guess.
All right, thank you, PJ. It's also important to note that when talking about SALNs don't even fall under FOI within the legislative infrastructure of the Philippines, because we currently don't have an FOI law. So FOI only applies to the executive department, and it's a different law that implements SALN access.
Yes, that is correct. We really do not have a law on FOI. It's not. It hasn't passed yet in the Congress. So what we have is an FOI executive order, and that means it only applies to the executive offices. The LGUs are not required to follow FOI, but they're encouraged. And then the legislative and the judiciary, they also do not have to follow uh, the FOI bill, but they're encouraged to join in. So, but but I guess what the citizen wants to see are, of course, the silence of our legislative part of the government, because they are the ones who we want to be really held accountable.
It's really fascinating because information literacy and open government are two sides of the same coin. On one hand, we have that perspective of asking questions, of holding people accountable. And on the other hand, it's all about giving them the answers even before they've started asking the question. With the, it's not a premonition, it's more of, how would you say it? It's with the assumption that they would want to find out those answers, that they would like to know. And that's the foundation of open government. You don't wait for someone to ask you to hold you accountable. Rather, you do it at the beginning. And this is where the records continuum model really um, does great. You talk of the capture of records and the uh, pro- proliferation of records, or um, continuum modelers would call it the pluralization of records, even at the moment of creation. So here we have silence being generated. Here we have government reports being generated, and they are made accessible. They are put into the public domain. They are structured in such a way to facilitate retrieval. Even before, citizens will have to go and ask. But then again, you have that FOI infrastructure where you have to go through the process of requesting information that should, in theory, be already publicly accessible. And it's really good that you gave us some examples of um, the different aspects of open government where you have, all right, fine, you have that live archive where the moment something is, a bill is passed, the moment that something is filed, you have it immediately accessible. But at the same time, you have these records, which are supposed to be created for the very purpose of open government, so such as the SALN, being obfuscated behind layers of bureaucracy. Um, Maybe you can tell us more about some of your experiences with the FOI request procedure, and maybe give us some examples of records that you successfully requested, or maybe you have some requests that were denied. But then in the back of your mind, you're thinking, why was this denied? Shouldn't there be records that exist of this information?
Okay, so I have a lot of examples, but I really don't want to name to name organizations. I guess a good thing about the FOI that we have here in the Philippines is that it's very, the system is transparent. All of the requests are available in the EFOI portal. You can view the requests. You can see which requests are being denied, which requests are being successfully granted. So one example is that I've requested for the number of, this is actually just an experiment. So I've requested for the number of plantilla positions for a certain government unit, for a certain government office. So if you're going, at the back of my head, I'm thinking, if you're going to ask an organization like a student org or a business corporation, how many full-time employees do you have? How many active members do you have? That is a question that they can easily answer. Uh, is that I'm assuming that that is right, no? But it happens that my request has been denied because according to the executive order, if you're going to request for something and then it's going to be like the the government office needs to do some research because of your request, then they have the right to deny your request. So they use that excuse to deny my request, and it seemed like it's a valid denial. But of course, there's also a lot of instances wherein information literacy will really play its role in requesting for FOI. For example, I've seen some students uh, asking research questions for specific government units, and then in those certain instances, they have the right to decline because they're asking the the government agency to do their research for them. So there's really, as you mentioned, I agree with you that the infrastructure in the open government and information literacy are really just the opposite sides of the coin, because on the one hand you need an information literate society so that are they have the capacity to request for information. They have the capacity to navigate this huge bureaucracy and then know what kind of questions to ask so that their FOI request will not be denied. No? So sayang yung effort kasi. Yan.
It begs the question, doesn't it, of what constitutes research, or more specifically, what constitutes extensive research? Because research could be as simple as retrieving a file and knowing that the file actually exists. So more specifically, when talking about employee records, for example, understanding how human resources records are managed and then where to retrieve the file of how many active positions you have versus actually having to manually count all of your employees. So, what is research, and to what extent is reasonable research versus extensive research? And then you'll also have to start asking questions when it comes to phrasing the question itself, phrasing the FOI query. And again, that's where information studies shine when talking about the information retrieval black box and how to phrase literacy questions. So, how about you, Wina? Given the scenario of asking the question, how many employees do you have? How will you approach that question from a reference perspective? How will you structure it if you're the one trying to ask that of a government agency?
Sa reference kasi meron tayong mga iba-ibang klase ng queries, no? So in the scenario that Sir PJ gave, he asked for uh, a particular he asked for the number of plantilla positions in a certain government office. So ang assumption natin would be uh, meron lang inherent curiosity si Sir PJ na gusto lang niyang masagot yung question na how many positions are there. But you can ask a different kind of question if you know the name of the document that you are looking for. So parang known item searching siya. So you know what you are looking for. Maybe another way that that question can be phrased would be um, can I see this type of document, and then you give the name of the actual document if you know what you are looking for. Yun. Kasi pwedeng a person knows what he is looking for. Pwede rin naman na yung question niya lang yung alam niya pero hindi niya alam kung ano yung hinahanap niya talaga na makakasagot dun sa question niya. Yun.
Ayun. And that's where the understanding of records management really comes into play. Because as you mentioned, if you don't know what record you're looking for, you'll have a heck of a time trying to figure out the information. But then, on the other hand, from an information literacy perspective and from an information services perspective, we know that we can't expect everyone to know what those records are. So then, as information professionals, we have to balance. All right, to what extent should we be advocating for the transparency of our records management processes and telling them about our record sets versus spending that advocacy time and advocacy opportunities to talk about our collections and what they can do about our collections. And that's always a really difficult thing to balance because on one hand, you can show them, all right, here are our series, here are our a list of items, and then someone who's not as well versed in bureaucratic processes, in or even for any records of an organization, if you give them just a simple list of all the records, they may not necessarily understand that unless they have a familiarity with the organization. Versus if you phrase it in such a way that, all right, here are our records, these are what you can do with them. But then again, you'll get someone thinking, all right, this is what I want to do, but I don't know where to start. And that's where you get into the nitty gritty of what is research and um, where do I start doing that research, and which is where information literacy comes into play. Being able to ask those kinds of questions, thinking, all right, I have a need. How do I go about addressing that need? And I guess that will bring us to the next part of this episode, talking about record keeping as a collective responsibility. And this question would be for both of you. When talking about the transparency of records, and not just the transparency of records, but also the transparency of record keeping. So again, going back to the continuum model of record keeping happens even before the moment of creation of a record, because you already have that mindset. Oh, people are going to need this. People are going to want to access this. So how then can we, both as information professionals, so as record keepers, as archivists, as librarians, um, keep the government accountable, maybe working within and without? And then how can we as citizens do the same?
Okay. Ako ba muna?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sige. Okay, sige. Dun sa how, yung question kasi, no, how could you help keep government accountable for its records? I think of this as a chain. So para siyang chain for me. I am a teacher of information literacy. So what I do is I try my best to impart the skills of knowing where to find sources that people can use to base their actions on. And aside from finding the source, being evaluative with the sources that they find. In this case, we're talking about records. So the records that they need to use. Yon. So I would like to think that in helping to keep government accountable, I contribute by creating, developing a citizenry, so in my students, that is more aware and mindful that one, um, there are records that they can use to base their decisions on. Okay. And that they are mindful that I always have to, I am allowed to ask questions. Yan. So kapag tinuro mo yun sa kanila, okay lang magtatanong, maging naturally curious kayo, bakit ganito ang nangyayari, yan. So ask questions. I teach them how to be information literate and then develop a recognition in them that it is important for them to ask these questions, to be familiar with the records that they can access para matulungan sila to take part uh, in society. Okay? Yan. So take part in what's happening around them, and that because of this, they are better equipped pwedeng to talk about certain concerns, certain topics that they might have, to form their own observations. Kasi naturo na natin sa kanila na, oh, pwede mong, if you're unsure about something, you can use these sources and then form your opinions based on your understanding of the sources and your evaluation of it, maybe related to what you're seeing, what's happening around you. Yan. Form their own observations of the things and then act based on the information that they acquire, they evaluate. Yan. So they are more informed. Tapos, pwedeng from there, because they are now conscious as to, meron palang ganitong source of information. So the next time that a need arises, I know which source to consult. Meron palang ganito pala yung practice. Maybe this can still be better improved by kung nako-compare nila yung practices na nakikita nila. And then, ayun, because you are more informed, you are able to see a bigger scenario, bigger picture. Parang, mas may nade-develop ka na expectations that there can be improvements that can be done kasi napag-aaralan mo. So, yun, I think yun yung role na nape-play as teacher of information literacy. Yeah. So, developing the sense of wonder, asking questions, yan.
Okay.
I agree with Ma'am Waina, no. Me also as a LIS teacher, whenever I discuss freedom of information, I made sure that by the end of the lesson, students know how to file a request and know their way around FOI. When it comes to public libraries and records officers, so records officers, they have this duty to know their records as part of the IRR of FOI. FOI officers, they need to publish their most requested documents information, so that whenever citizens are going to look at the citizen charter, at the website of the agency, they know which documents they can request to. So that is part of what you mentioned earlier. Public libraries, on the other hand, right now they are being equipped to guide citizens on how to not just file requests for the FOI, but also to navigate our huge government. So as you can see, in public libraries, we have NBI ID kiosks. So the librarians, they guide the citizens on how to request for an NBI, or how to request for NBI clearance or birth certificate. So these are important records that will help them become part of the society if they want to work or look for something. So with that, those are concrete examples of how the LAS profession and the records management profession will be part of making the government accountable. However, as always, it's not as simple as that. For example, FOI officers, they're not really records officers most of the time. They're most of the time they're doing the FOI officer on top of their regular role, and sometimes they're not being compensated. They don't get an extra salary for that. So you can also factor that as a factor if it is affecting their performance as an FOI officer. So there are some other factors that affects how the records officers and the public libraries will help enforce and will help support the open government movement.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that. It's highlighting the fact that we really need more records managers in government. So a lot of
Yes,
the
and positions,
yeah,
salaried positions.
there has to be records officers in every institution, not just government even. But it's the fact that it's highlighting the fact that, all right, you have these requests, you have this need for information that goes unfulfilled, mainly because you don't have the people, or if you do have the people, these people are doing it on top of their other jobs. And records management is not a job you just do on top of everything else. And I guess that also answers my last question. I was going to ask for a call to action of, why do we as citizens need to care about how government manages the records in the first place?
So as I mentioned earlier, part ng information literacy instruction, ang isang aspeto nito, ang recognition that there are sources deemed reliable for specific instances. So in this scenario, we are talking about records. So itong records na to, naalala ko pa from LIS 170, many, many, many years ago. Ayan. It serves as parang pwedeng may may ano yan, evidentiary value. Tama ba yung ginamit kong term, Sir Nathan?
Pwede naman.
Yun, evidentiary value. So yung ayun, government transaction, government functions, yan, yung mga meron yan na produce na mga dokumento. It produces records na pwede nating gamitin when the need arises for us to make informed decisions. That's what the records are for, di ba? To be consulted if we have questions. So yun, that's why we should care about how records in the government are being managed. Kasi may gamit tayo dyan. Yan. So, meron siyang purpose na sineserve para sa atin. Hindi naman yan kine-create lang, di ba? Meron siyang purpose na sineserve. So, yun. That's why we should care about how the records are being kept.
We should care about open government and proper records management because it will give us peace of mind. Because there's an example for whenever there are policies that are being produced by, for example, in our during the lockdown, kunwari, we need to wear face masks, we need to wear barriers when riding the motorcycle. So whenever they release those policies, it will cause a lot of confusion to the people. But let's say we know how uh, the committee arrived at the decision. The minutes of their meeting were made public, and then the studies that were done are also published. So everything is open. That will give us more confidence and trust to our government. And whenever they came up with something with a new policy, then if we know how they arrive at that policy because the records are open, then it will give us more peace of mind, and it will help us combat the the pandemic and what's happening with all around us. So we can connect all of those with records management. So if you really have a good records management strategy, you can help build a more open government.
Ayun. Peace of mind. So, ignorance is never bliss. You have to
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And with that, I think it's a good start on talking about archives and democracy, but we barely touched the surface of participatory democracy, of records and the role they play in social justice and social accountability, of even participatory archives and community archives. And maybe those are some more themes that we can explore in future episodes. And hopefully, we can invite you once again to the filming of those episodes. Thank you again so very much, Waina and PJ, for joining us this afternoon for this episode of For the Record and sharing your experiences and expertise with all of our viewers. I wish you all the best in your future research, and hopefully we can hear more from you in the later episodes. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you din.
Okay. So this has been For the Record, and more specifically, this has been the last episode of For the Record for 2020. So I wish everyone a very happy holidays, and hopefully we'll see you again next year. It seems like a long time from now, but it's only a few days left. We'll see you again next year for more episodes of For the Record. And also stay tuned for new productions coming from UP SLIS. I know we have a management lecture series coming out soon, and we also have our regular webinar Wednesdays. So this has been For the Record. For the Record is brought to you by UP SLIS. Find out more about our school on our website at upslis.info. See you next time.